Thank you so much for being here today, everyone. Government is slavery. I want to thank John from Liberty on the Rocks and the rest of the Liberty on the Rocks regular attendees for the opportunity to be here and present for you today. This, as John said, is part 2 of a presentation. I originally gave the first one at least a couple of years ago at Liberty on the Rocks. It was called The True Meaning and Purpose of the Second Amendment. And this is, today, The True Meaning and Purpose of the Second Amendment, Part 2, Arms, Needs, and Cowardice. And I will be giving the presentation in those 3 sections. And I want to say today that, I'll usually dedicate my presentations to maybe a very important historical figure, such as Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution. But today I'm going to dedicate this presentation to a group of people who are actually very important to me because they inspired a presentation like this from talking with them and understanding exactly where their mindset is at. And they are people who look like this. They're people who live on their knees. The cowards of the world. So this one is for you, cowards of the world. You know exactly who you are, deep down inside. And I've spoken to many of them in my personal experience. And them telling their mindset to me is what actually inspired this very presentation here today. So I know there's not many of them in the audience here, but I know that they're out there watching on the internet, and as I say, you know who you are. So before we begin, I usually give a little bit of a caveat about my presentation style, just by a show of hands. Who has never seen me present before? Okay, not bad, not bad. That's good, that's good. So my presentation style is often very harsh. It's very direct. I don't sugarcoat my words, and the easily offended should just leave now, okay? Because I don't care how offended I make anybody. I'm not here to be delicate with other people's sensibilities. I'm here to tell harsh truth that needs to be spoken. And because so few people are speaking that harsh truth, I'll do it. I'll take up that mantle and do it. No problem. But truth is combative. So I'm not going to sugarcoat my words or my delivery. Some may be upset or angry by what I will say during this presentation, so be it. Getting upset and getting angry will never make what I say untrue. Truth remains the truth, regardless how anyone feels about it. The truth by its nature is belligerent because it wages war against all forms of deception and mind control. I don't present this information to be liked, I don't present it to be popular, I don't present it to make money, and I don't present it to make friends, because certainly speaking truth like this will not make you any of those things. I speak publicly because I recognize that in the crisis of overwhelming ignorance and deception in which we live, I have a moral obligation to communicate what I know to be taking place in our world in order to help others understand it so they can then take action and do something about it. Thank you. Thomas Paine, one of the other founders of the American Revolution, without his philosophy it may not have ever occurred, said, "He who dares not offend cannot be honest." So I'm not here not to offend you, I'm here to be honest with you. So if you don't like it, that's what your cry closet is for. Unfortunately, I don't think we have one present. You might have to go to the nearest local university for a cry closet. But, So this quote always, hits home with me. Telling the truth and making someone cry is better than telling a lie and making someone smile. There's way too many people that want to do that. They're all over the news media, lying to you with a nice, pleasant smile on their face, looking real attractive, but they're, speaking with forked tongue. The only people who get mad at you for speaking the truth are the people who are living a lie. Isn't that the truth? So let's go through a very brief review of Part 1. Part 1 was called The True Meaning and Purpose of the Second Amendment. I gave it back here, back at Liberty on the Rocks at another place called the Cafe in Center City, Pennsylvania, on February 10th, 2015. It's actually been that long. So over 3 years ago. Amazing. That was the title card. So let's review some of the main points quickly, briefly, of that presentation, for those of you who may not be familiar with it or have watched it. The militia referred to in the Second Amendment is a decentralized and distributed force of armed individuals who maintain weapons and tactics similar to a military force, but they are not a military, and they are not centrally controlled or directed by a government. The militia is not a military or a standing army. It is the whole body of the population who would assemble to defend against a threat to their lives, rights, or freedom. That is the definition that the Founding Fathers put forward the militia to be. When they were asked what the militia was, they consistently and repeatedly told people that the militia was the whole of the people, over and over again, unambiguously. And the majority of the people during that time absolutely recognized the militia was the whole body of the people. Today, we barely even understand what the word means, let alone who constituted it. The term well-regulated in late 18th century parlance referred to discipline and uniformity. It meant that every weapon was maintained and functioning properly, and every person received basic tactical, combat, marksmanship, and weapons training. It did not mean government regulation. The Founding Fathers and the authors of the Second Amendment, James Madison and George Mason, were also abundantly and consistently clear when they were asked what the terms well-regulated meant. It did not mean regulated by a government. It meant you are using the same equipment, you understand how it works, you're receiving the same training, everything is set, checked, regularly maintained, and ready to go. That's what well-regulated meant. And anybody who's telling you differently is lying to you or ignorant. The militia was described as, quote, being necessary to the security of a free state. The word necessary means indispensable, cannot be dispensed with or gotten rid of. And we'll talk about needed, the word needs, later in the presentation. This meant that the militia was an absolute requirement for the preservation of a free way of life. The word free state, the term free state did not mean Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, etc. That's not what they were referring to by the term free state. It meant a free way of life. It was the militia was the very means required to ensure that the people would maintain the ability to defend their freedom with defensive force when necessary. Rights are universal and inherent to creation. Our natural rights are not man-made mental constructs. Let me reiterate that. Our natural rights are not man-made mental constructs. Too few people do not understand that rights are inherent to nature itself. They are not mental constructs invented by man. Rights are not granted or bestowed upon us by government. They are our natural and universal birthright endowed by the universe itself. The right of self-defense is one of our natural rights and can never be removed or incrementally encroached upon, or in other words, infringed by humankind. That is not a right to perform. Any attempt to do so is completely and utterly morally illegitimate. Now, that's what the word infringed means, to incrementally encroach on. The Founding Fathers are saying in this meme, gentlemen, I still believe shall not be infringed is quite clear. I mean, we won't be handing this nation over to morons, will we? Well, unfortunately, I think that's exactly what happened. Elbridge Gerry, one of the statesmen of the Revolutionary War era period, said, "What, sir, is the use of a militia? It is to prevent the establishment of a standing army, the bane of liberty." They called standing armies, in other words, armed forces, the bane of liberty. That's what the Founding Fathers and their contemporaries referred to standing armies as. And yet that's exactly what we have today. everywhere. The police and military forces constitute standing armies in our presence, in our midst. And the founders were vehemently opposed to this. They even put provisions in the Constitution to protect against the rise of standing armies, as I'll talk about. Whenever governments mean to invade the rights and liberties of the people, they always attempt to destroy the militia in order to raise an army upon their ruins. The militia was necessary to prevent the establishment of a standing army. The founders never intended us to have standing military forces. They're actually unconstitutional entities. And this is the standing army the founders warned us about. Militarized police forces in our midst that are the greatest direct threat to freedom that humanity faces. So let's get into section number 1. As I said, this presentation will be broken down into 3 sections: arms, needs, and cowardice. So you'll notice I did not define the word arms in that previous review, because this section is going to deeply explore what the founders meant by the word arms and the actual authors of the Second Amendment meant by arms. The Second Amendment does not just apply to firearms. Let me say that again. The Second Amendment does not just apply to firearms. Okay, people insist that this is what the Second Amendment is only about, that it's only about firearms, and it is not. The word firearms actually does not even appear in the Second Amendment. The wording of the Second Amendment is a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The word firearms does not appear in the wording. The word arms does appear with a capital A in the Second Amendment, and it literally meant any instrument that is capable of being used as a weapon for the purpose of self-defense. Any instrument that is capable of being used as a weapon for the purpose of self-defense, including but not limited to, you ready? Here we go. Pepper spray, tasers, knives, swords, hammers, brass knuckles, axes, bows and arrows, slingshots, baseball bats, tire irons, clubs, maces, pitchforks, nunchucks, throwing stars, bayonets, cannons, explosives, flamethrowers, pistols, shotguns, rifles, semi-automatic rifles, machine guns, grenades, lasers, tanks, airplanes, battleships, and atomic and nuclear weapons. That is what is being referred to in the Second Amendment. And if you don't think so, you're wrong. You do not understand the founders' original intent. It meant all and every implement of self-defensive weaponry. So these are arms, okay? Swords, knives, nunchucks, katanas, pistols, baseball bats, everything. You name the weapon. Some broken glass that you found on the ground, a brick, a table leg, okay? You can make improvised weapons. They're covered by the Second Amendment. Anything you can imagine, okay? Including firearms, including semi-automatic and automatic weaponry, including planes and tanks and bombs and grenades. And yes, let's take it out to its total conclusion. Okay, right away, let's get it all off the table. Let's take it all the way out to its total conclusions. People go, well, what about tactical nuclear warheads? Yes, yes, included in the Second Amendment, yes. Okay, and here, I'm going to go a little further because I'm an extremist, so let's go even further than that, okay? And here's the argument. But should everyone be allowed to have ... this weapon? Yes. Death Stars and Infinity Gauntlets for everyone. Okay? Let's just take it all the way out to its conclusion. Okay? Because here's the principle that should be understood, folks. People should not be focused on the weaponry. If the government has it, the people have to have it. If government has it, the answer is yes. The people should have it to defend themselves from government. Okay? So that's one of the main concepts I wanted to get right off the bat, out of the way for people to understand. And most people don't understand it because they're so fearful of weaponry. And that's what we're going to get to in Cowardice. We're going to get to the real psychological heart of the matter, where we're not going to be talking much about actual weaponry there. We're going to be talking about what goes on in the human mind and the human heart. And that's going to cut really to the quick. People have to understand the principles involved in the Second Amendment. This has nothing to do with the weaponry. They get too hung up on the weapons. This is about rights. This is about principles. The two principles of enlightenment, the two pillars of enlightenment, the two pillars of natural law, as I refer to them. The sacred feminine non-aggression principle. It is always morally wrong to initiate violence against other sentient beings. Always. Don't start violence against other people. Period. That's it. So simple. And yet people can't adhere to it. Especially government and their agents certainly can't adhere to that principle. They throw that right out the window. Well, you have to combine the sacred feminine principle of non-aggression with the sacred masculine principle of self-defense. They have to be wed together, hand in hand. They cannot ever be separated from each other. You have to maintain the sacred masculine self-defense principle to include your natural law rights. This means that owning and using any weapon for the purpose of self-defense is an inherent human right. Notice I said self-defense, not initiating violence or aggression against other people. Weaponry must always be maintained for self-defensive purposes, and that's the self-defense principle. In other words, do no harm but take no shit. That's what enlightenment really constitutes. That's what constitutes a genuinely enlightened being. And yet, people can't get simple principles. They can't wrap their mind around simple principles. And that's because of fear. To possess and carry arms is a natural human right. The Second Amendment does not grant any rights to anyone. I don't think I made that clear enough in Part 1. The Second Amendment grants no rights, folks. Okay? The whole Bill of Rights does not grant any rights. No, they're not government rights. They're not constitutional rights. They're natural rights. The Second Amendment was originally intended to act as a written guarantee that the government of the United States would never be permitted to even encroach upon our natural rights to self-defense with arms. Any laws limiting the people's right to own and carry arms of any kind are immoral decrees which are completely null and void in the realm of nature. Such so-called laws are passed to incrementally chip away at our inherent right to self-defense. The very act of attempting to limit our natural right to defend ourselves with weaponry is in and of itself tyranny. The very act of attempting to do it is tyranny. Any and all encroachments upon this natural right of self-defense are morally illegitimate. I don't care what law it says in government books. I'm not talking about that kind of legitimacy. I'm talking about it's not morally legitimate. No one has the right to do it in nature. It is a wrong to attempt to do it. So think about it, folks. I can carry a .45 automatic Colt pistol on my hip, 45 ACP, and that's seen as okay in most of the states in the United States. And yet, in almost every single state in the United States, the hand weapons on this side are not allowed to be carried, and there is no permit to carry them. You cannot apply for any permit to carry them anywhere in the entire United States. I can't carry a pair of brass knuckles to defend myself. I can't carry a knife, especially a switchblade, to defend myself in most states, and I can't in any state carry a pair of nunchucks, which would be one of my weapons of choice because I'm trained in using them. You know, I would rather have something like a pair of nunchucks, which I could gradually increase from non-lethal to semi-lethal to lethal force because I know how to use them, and use them with different gradations of force, rather than have to take out a pistol that one shot is probably going to kill another human being no matter where it hits them, because they'll bleed out. Okay? But yet, I can't carry any of the weapons on this side. Okay? Ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. And yet there are people who still don't understand, not only does this apply to the Second Amendment, but think that that's somehow okay, that that's somehow morally acceptable. You know, it's called moral relativism in the rights, in moral relativism in man's law. That's what that's called. And that's the other problem with why we're going deep down into bondage. Because the vast majority of this society is morally relativistic and believes in relative morality. Especially people even in the libertarian and anarchist movements. And that's why we're not making any headway. Because we think man makes up what rights are. And we could just make up rights here, they apply in this geographic region and at this time, and in other geographic regions and times and places they don't apply. Or different laws of right and wrong apply. It's nonsense. It's ridiculous, immoral nonsense. Another argument you get from people who are anti-Second Amendment is that the Founding Fathers didn't even envision the technological advances that we would have in firearms. And a lot of people rightly respond to them. They didn't envision the internet either. Does that mean you don't have freedom of speech on it? Because they didn't understand that the internet would exist one day? Secondly, they're wrong. The Founding Fathers absolutely did envision technological advances in weaponry and had semi-automatic firearms in their time. And these are 4 examples of semi-automatic firearms during the Revolutionary War era. The pepper box revolver, which was a six-shot revolver that you could load 6 rounds into it before having to reload. The Belton flintlock musket was an early semi-automatic musket. The Girondani rifle was an air rifle, an air-operated like a piston rifle, operated by air that would be carried on a separate wagon and could fire 20 musket balls in under 5 seconds. It's between 20 and 30, actually. And then the puckle gun, which was a rotating semi-automatic, sort of like a small cannon. Okay, all 4 of these weapons existed during the Founders' times. So they had semi-automatic weaponry. Not only could they not envision it, they already had it. So the people who bring up this ridiculous argument are ignorant to history. They don't even understand what weaponry existed during the Revolutionary period. Our unalienable right to self-defense never expires or becomes outdated. This is another thing people have to understand. They say, oh, that was then and this is now. Oh, that applied to their time. It doesn't apply now. No, rights don't work like that, folks. They're eternal because they're not made by man. They're inherent to creation. Contrary to what many authoritarian statists would claim, our unalienable rights never expire. Maintaining the means for effective self-defense with weaponry is a basic human right and can never expire or become outdated. Human beings' necessary means of self-defense should always grow in scope and scale in proportion to the existential threats of every age. That means if 100 years from now the government develops more advanced weaponry than the people have, the people should have access to that government. And it should continue to grow in proportion to whatever any potential enemy of the people has. Lysander Spooner said, "A man's natural rights are his own against the whole world. Wouldn't matter how many people say they're not valid. Any infringement of them is equally a crime, whether committed by one man or by millions, whether committed by one man calling himself a robber or any other name indicating his true character, or by millions calling themselves government." Absolutely. The problem is, you're not going to hear this man's philosophy espoused in modern universities and high schools and grade schools, because they don't want children to learn that. They want them to learn socialism and communism so they could get in line like good little following sheep. They're not interested in teaching the actual philosophy of freedom to human beings, no. They want to prepare the way for slavery. That's the arms section, so that people absolutely understand what the word arms and the Second Amendment apply to, and that it does not just apply to firearms, it applies to any implement that can be used as a weapon for the purpose of self-defense. And that is absolutely true and the case. Okay? I'm not making the claim that I think that that was their intent. That was their intent. Okay? That's what the words in the Second Amendment actually mean, factually. So this section is called needs. Now we get into even hairier areas because we're talking about what people perceive, their perceptions. We're getting out of even the physical realm. Now we're going into the mental and emotional realm of what people perceive as needed. Then in the last section, Cowardice, we're going to go really deep into the philosophy of this, into the psychology of this, I should say. What did the founding fathers, understand to be absolutely needed? In the entire U.S. Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, the only element described by the framers as being, quote, necessary, meaning unable to be dispensed with, was a well-regulated militia. Think about that. They didn't say the presidency was necessary. They didn't say the Congress was necessary. They didn't say the judiciary was necessary. They didn't say any other element of government was necessary. They said the militia was necessary. And they meant the militia that was comprised of the body of the people. Not the Congress, not the judiciary, not even the presidency was described as necessary by the framers of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. And they were men who were specific and meticulous about every single detail of every single word they wrote. They wrote that the element of society that we need to secure a free way of life is the militia. The possibility that a governing body of any kind could easily descend into tyrannical oppression was abundantly clear to the Founding Fathers. They prescribed that the natural rights of the people were to be protected with defensive force if necessary. This could only be done by ensuring that the people who constitute the militia would never be disarmed. And that was the original intent of the Second Amendment. See, we need what they have, as a reiteration of what I said in the arms section. If a government already has a certain class of weaponry that the body of the people who they allegedly represent do not possess, those people are already subject to a state of tyranny because they would not possess the necessary means to employ their natural right to alter or abolish the government. The militia is necessary, needed, to ensure that the people possess the required defensive capacity to resist government tyranny. And yes, that is what it is about. It is not about hunting. It is not about just self-defense in your home or on the street. It is about defense against government and their agents when they become tyrannical and oppressive. In other words, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. You have to maintain what the opposing side has. Because here's what happens when you bring a knife to a gunfight. Y'all remember this? Yeah, it brings back memories from my childhood. This is what happens when you bring a knife to a gunfight. That's what happens. Okay? So it's about maintaining equality in the ability to inflict damage to the opposing side. But you bring a knife to a gunfight, and that'll happen almost every time, unless you're some super well-trained, incredibly trained martial artist who knows how to get within closing distance in a very short period of time. The militia is needed to ensure that the people have what they need. Let me say that again. The militia is needed to ensure that the people have what they need when the time comes. And I'll explain that. In military engagements, armed forces seek to secure what is called full spectrum dominance. In other words, control over land, sea, and air. A primary purpose of this engagement style is to secure supply lines for your own forces while simultaneously preventing movement of supplies necessary for the opposing forces to continue to fight. One of the main purposes of the militia is to counteract such a military engagement style. This is accomplished by having supplies and means for potential battle already in place. And that is the very definition of a distributed fighting force. You distribute the supplies and the means for battle throughout the entire geographic region. That's what a distributed fighting force or a militia is. So if and when supply lines do become blocked by an opposing force, needed items for engagement are already available where you are at. Governments continuously attempt to dissuade people from forming a truly effective, well-regulated militia because they know how effective a militia is against the battle logistics of a long-term standing army. Governments also have attempted to incrementally disarm the general population so that they can permanently prevent any righteous rebellion from a people's militia against government tyranny and slavery. That's what incrementally disarming people through different laws is all about. That's what gun control agenda is all about, incremental disarmament. So here's the big question everybody asks who's anti-gun and anti-Second Amendment and pro-gun control agenda. What do you need a combat rifle for? And I will not call it an assault rifle because it's an absolute asinine term. Assault is an engagement style or assault is an actual behavior. It's not an assault rifle any more than your fork is an assault fork. Okay? So let's stop using completely and utterly asinine terms. It's a combat rifle. It's a rifle that is used in combat engagement. Those are designed to kill multiple people wait, let me see if I can get the voice right. Those are designed to kill multiple people in a short amount of time. Well, thank you, Brainiac. Did you stay up all night with your slide rule and your abacus figuring that one out? Okay? Really? That's what they're designed for? Thank you for informing me. I didn't know. Yeah, of course that's what they're designed to do. That's what a battle rifle is. That's what a combat rifle is. Combat rifles are needed by the populace because government, which is based on coercion and violence, can and will become tyrannical and attempt to enslave the population. It's not like it hasn't happened in even the very near past. It has occurred within the last 100 years, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it's just a very cursory look in a history book, which most people run away in a million miles an hour in the opposite direction from these days. I'm well aware. But even a cursory popping open of a history book will display that government has and will become tyrannical. Good people who will not tolerate such an immoral condition will not just allow their freedom to be taken from them without a physical fight. They know that government and those who support its violence have no right to do what they are doing to take away or even attempt to take away their rights and freedom. Why do we need combat rifles? They are tools for shooting and killing multiple agents of the state, should that eventuality become necessary. Okay? Nobody just wants to say it out in the open like it is without sugarcoating it. Combat rifles are for killing agents of government. That's what they're for. And hey, people say, oh, that's not going to happen. This is a police officer holding a fully loaded combat rifle at an unarmed individual's face. And we don't think we're already in that situation. Okay? That's what's going on every day in America. And yet people will say what I just said was an extreme statement. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's extreme. This is common sense, self-defense. That's extremity. Okay? Let's get it clear. Why would anyone ever need a 30-round magazine? How about at a slaughter massacre like Wounded Knee? Okay? Count them. Okay? Agents of the state coming for people's freedom and lives. And we don't think it can happen. People who don't think that that can happen are 100% ignoramuses regarding human history. That's all I have to say about that. It's a nice, funny meme here with the Founding Fathers all confronting Thomas Jefferson. You don't need a military assault rifle to hunt with, Tommy. And he responds, well, that depends entirely on who I'm hunting. You don't need 30 rounds to hunt. Correct. But the Second Amendment was not written in case the deer turn against us. Okay? what do I want to respond? That people will say, what do you need a combat rifle for? My response to them is, what do we need a standing army for? What do we need a standing army for? Okay? If a threat requiring, see, this is what the Second Amendment was really about. This is the actual intent, the actual true meaning and purpose of the Second Amendment. If a threat requiring military-grade force should arise, it would be the responsibility of the people, not the government, the people, to bring forth the members of the militia and the necessary weaponry to wage such a conflict. And then afterward, the weaponry of war would either be destroyed or returned into the hands of the people's militia. Such weapons of war would certainly and should certainly not be kept at the disposal of an institutional government's military, where they can actually do the most harm and the most destruction to people that did not commit violence. Even the U.S. Constitution, I'm not a constitutionalist, I'm an anarchist. I'm a radical, extremist anarchist. I'm not a constitutionalist. All government is slavery. All forms of government is slavery. Okay? But even the Constitution, who constitutionalists and minarchists want to get behind, okay, even it specifically forbids the continuance of a standing army in Article 1, Section 8. It specifically forbids the continuance of a standing army. The standing army is meant to be dissolved after a military-grade conflict, requiring it. And the Constitution specifies that no money is to be appropriated to any army, anything constituting an army or a standing military, for any longer than a period of 2 years. Specifically provisioned in the U.S. Constitution. Because we've ignored these types of constitutional provisions, the idea that the people could never wage a war against government tyranny is firmly anchored in this technological disparity that has been allowed to propagate. We've allowed the military to continuously build up their grade of weapons to a point where they have things that the population doesn't have, and then the population thinks we could never possibly fight them. That's where that mentality, that psychology comes from, because we've ignored provisions like that in the Constitution. Government-controlled standing armies don't even have any right to exist, let alone manufacture weapons of intimidation and mass destruction, as they have. And here's the clause in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12. Congress shall have power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Right in the Constitution. The author of the Second Amendment said it himself. George Mason, who wrote the Second Amendment, said that the people have a right to mass and bear arms, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state, that standing armies in a time of peace are dangerous to liberty and therefore ought to be avoided. Right from the author of the Second Amendment himself. And yet people want to debate its meaning. No, you want to know what we need a standing army for? Right here is what we need a standing army for. That's what the standing army is used for, folks. Look at it and weep. Cry all you want in your beer, cry in your milk. It's never going to make it untrue. We're defending poppy fields in Afghanistan, and we're taking as much natural resources in the form of oil as we can from countries in the Middle East. That's what standing armies are doing every single day. So get as offended about that as you like. That's the truth of what standing armies are doing. Because if they were really fighting for our freedom, this is what it would look like. Right there. Yeah, but you won't see that from order followers. Order followers are people who do what they're told regardless of what's moral. Regardless of what's morally right. Okay? And that's what all of these people are. We have right now in this country a complete reversal of the Founding Fathers' original intent of the Second Amendment, of the entire setup of the country. What the Founding Fathers envisioned as needed and what we have today are completely reversed. Today, people envision that it is necessary to have a standing army, yet we don't have a true, well-regulated militia. The Founding Fathers would have seen our current condition as tyranny. What they envisioned for us to keep in place was the exact opposite, that we should never have a standing army unless there was a very direct threat against the country and its people, and that a militia comprised of the people would always be necessary to provide for the defense of the citizens against foreign or domestic threats to their lives or freedom. That was the purpose of the militia. That was why it was needed. But here is the logic of the gun control mob about what we should have and what we should be allowed to have and what we need. Gun control advocates would choose to leave guns only in the hands of the police and the military. Rights are the same for everyone. No one has any special rights that other people don't have. Everybody has the same exact rights. So how does law enforcement, by definition, itself a standing army? If you really look at the characteristics of what a standing army means. Law enforcement is a standing army everywhere in every city. How do they have the right to own and use firearms, but the people do not? According to the gun control mob, as I like to call them. I don't call them the gun control crowd, the gun control advocates. They're the gun control mob. Okay? Belief that any government personnel can own and use firearms, but the body of the people should be forcibly restricted from doing so, is a recipe for tyranny, slavery, and mass murder. As I call it, a recipe for total enslavement. We're in a form of covert enslavement right now. But you want to see overt, total, totalitarian enslavement of a populace? You give up your right to keep and bear arms, and you'll see it real quick. So this is who leftists and authoritarians want to have all the guns and ammunition in the hands of. Great fucking idea. Real smart. Real smart. Yet, this is how their logic goes, okay? Their so-called logic, okay? The police are violent, racist, murdering thugs, and I 100% concur. Yes, they are. That's what they're doing in this country. They've been doing it forever. They're violent, they're racist. I've seen their racism firsthand, and they're murderers. Period. Get as offended about it as you like. That's true, and nothing. Your emotions will never make that untrue. But then in the next breath, the same people who want to take away my rights to defend myself with firearms will say police are the only people should be allowed to have guns, particularly semi-automatic weaponry. You have got to be kidding me. You cannot be. It is impossible to get more stupid than that. But yet, that's the power of mind control. That's what mind control, that's what social engineering is. That's how that was accomplished. And I'm going to talk about that, because most people know nothing about it. So to wrap up this section, your emotion-based, quote, need to feel, quote, safe does not trump my reality-based need and right to defend my freedom with firearms. The need to feel safe, or even, and here's where I'm going to offend a lot of people, and I could care less, even children being murdered by firearms, are not sufficient reasons to abolish human rights. However tragic any situation may be, and I agree, children being murdered with firearms is tragic and should not occur, okay? But be that as it may, that situation will never be grounds for disarmament of a population or abandonment of human rights. If a child dies due to gun violence, that is a violation of the child's right to life by an individual taking wrong, violent action. It is not a justification to violate the rights of other individuals to own firearms for the purpose of defending themselves from violent individuals. Most child fatalities anyway by firearms are due to a lack of proper weapons, safety, and training on the part of adults, which would be omnipresent if we maintained a well-regulated militia. There wouldn't be those type of accidents, or they would be almost negligible. But that's where most children died due to firearms, statistically, not in mass shootings. Here's what the crowd who wants to ban firearms sounds like, okay? Yet they'll say that they hate him, yet they speak the exact same rhetoric. The most foolish mistake we could possibly make would be to allow the races that we subjugate to possess arms. Hitler. Yeah, it's a great role model to base a society on, don't you think? Yet that's what people in America would actually base firearms ownership on, the words of an absolute psychopath like that. And yet they can't even see the contradiction in their thoughts. The contradiction isn't even apparent to them. 55 million innocent lives murdered by socialist tyrants in the 20th century alone. Stalin, 20 million. Pol Pot, 2 million. Adolf Hitler, 13 million. Mao Zedong, 20 million. So, isn't that a wonderful trend of what happens when you disarm your population? It's called democide, death by government. First, they disarmed their populations, and then mass murder took place. It's a historical pattern. And once again, if people spend less time looking at their smartphone on Facebook and more time in a history book, they would understand that's the historical pattern. Hard to swallow pills. And here's my sentiment exactly, folks, and like I said, get as offended as you like. 10 million school kids could die from gun violence every day, and it still wouldn't trump my natural right to self-defense. Get over it. Don't put words in my mouth or get it twisted either. I don't want to see that eventuality. But I'm telling you, you're not going to judge me based on what other people do. My actions belong to me. They're my responsibility. That's like punishing the class because one kid talks out, when he shouldn't be. Okay? That's a tyrant's position. That I'm going to take everybody's rights away because somebody acted out in a way that they shouldn't have. I will not be held responsible for misdeeds committed by people who look like me, with guns like me, or for any actions by other people. I am responsible only for my own actions. The last words on guns and needs. It's better to have one and not need it than to need one and not have it. Ain't that the truth? Yeah, go look up stories of people who were in a situation requiring a firearm. They didn't have one on their person. That's tragic. That's tragedy because it could have been averted. And if the government says you don't need a gun, you need a gun. Take it from first-hand accounts, okay? So let's move on to the real meat and potatoes of this presentation, cowardice. Now we're going to get into, the first section was like physical stuff. Then the next section is more emotional stuff. Now we're going to get into the deep-seated psychological material. Because this is where it all falls apart for most people. Okay? And this is where most people don't have the necessary courage to really understand what the Second Amendment is truly about. What the right to self-defense, period, is truly about. Patrick Henry said, fear is the passion of slaves. And Frank Herbert in Dune said, fear is the mind killer. Well, I say fear is the freedom killer. The fastest way a population is going to descend into tyranny is when they remain in a consciousness of fear. And that's because fear of death is the beginning of slavery, as we'll talk about. I'm going to introduce a term most people probably have never heard of. It's called hoplophobia. Hoplophobia is the irrational fear of weapons. Here's a quote by Eric S. Raymond, who's a freedom advocate. He said, hoplophobia, like homophobia, is a displacement symptom. Hoplophobes fear their own forbidden feelings and urges to commit violence. This would be harmless, except that they project those feelings onto others. See, that's the real psychological motivation for not wanting weapons in your presence, is because they're so psychologically immature that they don't trust themselves with them. See, when I'm walking in the general population with weaponry, as I am right now, okay, it actually makes me more focused and more calm and more intent and watching every bit of my emotional makeup, because I realize the deadly force I have at my disposal. That makes me more responsible, because I'm already a responsible adult. Then when you add that actual ability to take life in self-defense. Okay? It actually amplifies your responsible qualities in good people. See, that's what I'm trying to explain, is that hoplophobes, people who fear weapons, deep down inside, they're not really good people. Deep down inside, they don't trust themselves because they have these urges deep within their psyche that they would act upon at a whim, at a moment's notice. And that's why they fear weapons so much. It's a displacement symptom. This is called displacement in clinical psychology. Sigmund Freud also recognized it, and he recognized it as a symptom of immaturity. He said, and I don't care what you think of the man otherwise, I don't agree with everything he talked about psychologically, but on this he was dead on point. He said a fear of weapons is a sign of retarded sexual and emotional maturity. Absolutely on point. Couldn't have said it any better myself. And then the woman holding the pistol there in this meme says, my right to defend myself with a gun supersedes your ignorance and irrational fear of guns. And I couldn't agree with her anymore. Just because someone is uncomfortable with something doesn't trump a right. That's what we have to why we have to understand what rights are. That's why most people can't define what a damn right is in the year 2018. They can't just spit out the answer. A right is an action that does not cause harm to another sentient being. They can't spit that definition out. And that's why we're losing our rights. Because people don't even know what a right is. How could you defend what you don't know how to define? Just think about that for a moment. Yet this is where we are at societally. We're a nation of grown children. A nation of fearful grown children living under the stairs. Emotional maturity requires a developed understanding of self-defense. Because self-defense is part of self-love and self-respect. I'm better than my emotional, psychological, and entire makeup of my personality is actually more valuable than every single person in all of government that has ever lived or existed. That's the infinite value of my life, my mind, and my existence. That's how much self-respect I have. I'm more valuable than tyrants and oppressors and people who want to do violence unto other people. People who would enslave other people. Okay? I'm more valuable. My life is more valuable than people who would put other people in the chains of slavery. That's the kind of self-respect I have for myself, and that's what other people, how they should value their own life and their own mind and their own psychological makeup if they were true adults. That's why my self-defensive rights come before somebody else's need to feel safe. It comes before somebody else's irrational fears. Stunted and childlike development is exhibited through fearful emotional arguments that are devoid of any rationality or logic. And believe me, there is a deluge of that in our society today. Modern day political leftists and authoritarians suffer from this emotional arrested development due to ignorance and cowardice. Fear almost always stems from ignorance. Since they don't know how to use weapons to protect themselves, they irrationally fear that all weapons are going to harm them somehow, or they're going to harm someone else with them. When it comes to weapons, they react only with fear, and they insist that everyone else should have to lose their natural right of self-defense just so they can be allowed not to be afraid. This is the mentality of an immature, fearful, bratty child with poor or absent parenting. Government is only too happy, I'm sorry I have a spelling error there, I'll correct that in my final slides, is only too happy to step in and become the proxy parent for such grown children. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we have a two-party system in politics. One represents daddy, that's the Republican Party, who's going to keep everybody safe from cradle to grave. He's going to fight everybody's battles for them. And then we have mommy. That's the Democratic Party that's going to nurture and take care of everyone from cradle to grave. Don't you get it? That's the parent system. That's the psychological proxy parent system. And nobody's even thought of it. They don't even recognize it. It's staring them in the face. And they can't recognize it. And the reason why, they don't know who they are. If you don't know your own psychological makeup, and you don't know how the system of oppression and control is acting as a proxy for what you are secretly yearning and craving for, the absent parenting that most of us never really truly had. It's a parental abandonment issues psychologically that drive that control dynamic. Yeah, exactly. So, you have children saying, I feel safer in gun-free zones because criminals aren't allowed to use guns in them, right? That's how it works, right? Yeah, that's how it works. And then you have brats like this, who, tragic things happen in their school. Well, I wish things like that wouldn't occur, but guess what? We have to also understand they're not always as we're told that they occurred either. They didn't always go down as we're told by the mainstream media and government that they went down, okay? So let me tell you something. While I empathize that, classmates may have been harmed and killed, you're not taking my weapons. Not without bloodshed, my friends. You're not taking my weapons. You're not going to take 99% of the people who have weapons away from them. Not in America. You may get it done, but you're going to have to drop hydrogen bombs to do it. Let me tell you that. Know it like you know your own name or like you know the sun's coming up on the eastern horizon tomorrow. You'd have to drop hydrogen bombs on this country to take the people's weapons here. It ain't going to be like Europeans. It ain't going to be like Australians. You ain't going to do it like the Canucks, like the Euros, or like the Aussies. This is an entirely different animal you're dealing with in America. Believe it. Let me explain how children like that are output into our society. It's called social engineering. And if people don't know about it, they better look it up and they better start reading. Okay? And I call it what it really is. You want to use the scientific and the politically correct term or whatever? It's called social engineering. All right? But what I call it is what it really is, mind control. And that's what most people are under. They're under mind control. Okay? Social engineering is used to keep us ignorant and afraid. The socialist, communist, outcome-based education system that we have in place in this country is keeping people in a state of ignorance regarding inherent rights through indoctrination into postmodernism. This is what is being taught in universities all over this country, all over the world. Postmodern thought, which is all about think with your feelings, everything is relative, okay? And you could just believe whatever you want. And that'll basically make it so. And everybody's belief independently is just as valid as everybody else's belief. No, it's not. There's such a thing called truth. And then there's such a thing called aligning perception to truth, which is what our job as human beings should be to do. So we're not unthinking, irrational imbeciles. That's what critical thinking is. That's what our children should be being taught, critical thinking skills. But no, they're being taught how to use their feels to come to conclusions. Look, I'm an advocate for emotions. People have to get in touch deeply with their emotional selves. I mean, our emotions are a compass, a guidance system for morality, so that we can feel what we do to other people. But you can't come to logical, correct conclusions about truth and what's going on in the world just by feeling it. You have to read and research and study and weed out contradictions and use scientific methodology. You're not going to come to conclusions about what is true and real with your feelings. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. Cultural Marxism and social Darwinism have become the basis for, quote, determining what rights are. School shooting events are employed to drive an agenda of disarmament under the pretext of safety. Such programs directly target the minds of the youth to instill postmodern ideology, socialism and communism, and the disarmament agenda, all of which accelerate the destruction of human freedom. And then we have the mainstream media, who is directly in league with intelligence agencies and big tech corporations such as Google, furthering the agenda of oppression through censorship of dissenting information. Children and adults increasingly believe today that unless information came from the government, that it is not true. They believe government is the only legitimate official source of information. Folks, how many people in this room have read the book by Jim Keith called Mass Control? Mass Control by the gentleman named Jim Keith. I want to count. Please leave your hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 people. Absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Everyone here, if you want to know what is taking place in America and throughout the world, should have already read the book by Jim Keith called Mass Control. Mass Control by Jim Keith. He was assassinated for writing this book. He was found dead under suspicious circumstances with no connections to the crime, no one arrested for it, because of the information he released in this book about exactly how much and how deeply embedded the Central Intelligence, members of Central Intelligence in the United States, have embedded themselves in United States media corporations and entities. And he discovered that it is far worse than how embedded the KGB was in Soviet Russia media. But only, see, there's a big difference between them and us. There's a big difference between people living under Soviet rule in the USSR and people today in America. The people living under Soviet rule, when the KGB owned every aspect of just about every media outlet that they were allowed to see and hear, laughed at it. They laughed at it. They thought it was a joke. They turned the news on at night and said to one another, "Here comes the KGB report." Literally. Literally, it was a common phrase. The KGB report is what the nightly news was called in Soviet Russia. Here, full-grown adults, or people who think of themselves as adults, actually believe that they're being given critical information that they need to hear and understand when they're watching the nightly news, and don't believe that the CIA 100% controls the news media and the outlets that put forward the news, so-called news. This is how naive and childish the American population is. And it's because they don't do reading. It's because they're too busy flipping through Instagram photos. Okay? Mass Control by Jim Keith. Indispensable reading. So, this meme says, Operation Mockingbird, talked about in the book, was a fully implemented CIA program to spread disinformation throughout American media. CIA Director William Colby testified to the Church Committee that over 400 CIA agents were active in U.S. media to control what was reported through American mainstream television, newspapers, and magazines. Do you know when that was given? 70s. In the 1970s. I believe it was 1971, if I have the year correct. But it was the early 1970s. Could you imagine how bad it is today? Yeah, and then YouTube and Google want to make it worse by actually censoring people. They don't understand that this is the opening volley of a war. This is the opening volley of civil war. And they don't understand how serious what they're doing by censoring alternative views are. Let's get to the psychological heart of the matter, the real psychological heart. People don't want the responsibility of self-defense. They want somebody else to be responsible for their self-defense. They don't want to take that natural responsibility that cannot actually be delegated to anyone else and own it. And there's a reason for that. They fear the possibility that they may be injured or killed in the exercise of that personal responsibility, and that they are also highly fearful of the possibility that they themselves may need to shoot and kill another human being in their own defense. This is one of the greatest fears of human beings. See, they can't envision that they actually may have to take the life of another human being. So I ask everyone here today and everyone watching, if someone was attempting to take your life or freedom, or the life or the freedom of those you love, do you know whether or not you could, in fact, willfully kill another human being? Yes. How many people have actually really deeply sat with themselves and thought about that potentiality? You know? That's what shadow work is. You know, psychological work is not always positive. Sometimes you have to envision doing the worst things that you may need to do. You know, and there's the people who are going to be coming for those rights and freedom and possibly lives. You know, because they don't call it a police state for no reason. You'll notice that it's not called a politician state, right? It's not called a judge state, a banker state, right? It's not called any of those things. It's called a police state. There's a reason, because those are the people who lock it down. Those are the people who come for the rights. Those are the people who come for the guns. Those are the people who come for the lives. And if you don't know that, you're a very psychologically immature child. Fear of doing what needs to be done. This is all part of, overarchingly, this is all part of fear of freedom. Fear of self-defense is fear of freedom. Because in freedom is contained self-defense. You cannot actually be free without taking the responsibility of your own self-defense. No one else can actually provide that as a service to you, no matter how much you think government is beneficent and actually wants to protect you. No, it wants to control you. It wants to protect its masters, who it thinks are somehow, that's going to somehow magically save them. Like, they're going to be the last ones eaten by the great beast, you know? But as long as they're the last one to go into its, huge jaws, then that's great. They won somehow. That's how order followers think. This is how retarded they are. You have to be broken at a soul level to think that you cannot kill another person who is coming for your life. Now, I want to give an allegorical example. How many people watch The Walking Dead? I find it a pretty interesting allegorical television show about what would happen in a complete societal collapse and how people would behave toward each other. And it's probably much more sanitized than what you would actually see. But in this recent episode of the television show The Walking Dead, the so-called hero, who incidentally is a former cop, Rick, did not exemplify a moral person when he spared the murderous psychopath Negan. Negan in this allegory represents government. And he says, I am the New World Order. You're going to give me 50% of all your earnings, which is what any good definition of slavery basically is, except total slavery is you're giving me 100%. You're doing all the work and giving me 100% of what you earned. But he's saying, I'm going to be the new king. You're going to do the work. You're going to give me 50%. Okay? And he says, and if you don't give me 50%, you're going to die. That's his New World Order, explained in the Walking Dead TV show. So this guy, Rick, who's supposed to be the hero, finally gets a chance to kill this guy, and he leaves him alive. And what I say is, he wasn't doing anything moral by sparing his life. He was actually acting immorally. He was endangering every single other life in the entire group by leaving him alive. Sparing his life was the equivalent of letting loose a wild, hungry tiger into the middle of a village full of children. Because he couldn't do what needed to be done. Because he has this ridiculous romantic notion of keeping people in a cage is somehow less barbaric than ending their life. When they're an absolute animalistic psychopath that has proven that they're just a murderous beast and needs to be dealt with as such. Would you go and try to capture, if a tiger came into a village and killed a bunch of children, do you think you're going to just go, take it, cage it, and then keep it in the village with the children? I mean, really? What would be done? You'd go and hunt it with a high-powered rifle and end the threat. That's what a sensible person would do. I understand, look, I'm all for being 100% just as harmless to animals as I want to be to people. But there is a limit when something is coming and killing you and eating you. That's called very simple self-defense and self-preservation. It doesn't mean you're making that the goal of your entire life. It means that when a threat presents itself, you do the moral and actual effective thing to continue to live and not have your people devoured. And that's the state that we're at right now with government. Because government is opening up its jaws and getting ready to clamp down on our throats. It has been doing it. I keep telling people war has already begun. War has already begun. 10,000 people have been killed without trial by police in America since 9/11 on the streets of America. And you don't think that's war statistics? You don't think those are the statistics of war? I'll give you statistics of war where not that many people have been killed in war. Police have murdered without trial 10,000 United States citizens since 9/11 occurred. And we're standing here having presentations. Really? Really? See, because people are fearful of fighting a battle that they believe they might not win. And that's not a mentality of good people. That's a mentality of cowards. Cowards think like that. Good people don't think like that. Okay? Good people don't put their life before they put freedom. Most people are afraid of righteous rebellion. And let me just say something. Thank God for the revolutionaries of America who fought and made it possible for me to even get these ideas into my mind and speak them. Thank the creator of the universe for those men and women. And people think that that wasn't a legitimate righteous rebellion. That they believe that wasn't a legitimate righteous rebellion against England. And we'll talk negatively against the American revolutionaries. In America. Just because they think all of them were slave owners. No. It was less than 1%. And it certainly wasn't the revolutionaries of the North who were trying to abolish slavery back then. Particularly some of the founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson, who wrote anti-slavery clauses into the original Declaration of Independence, and then the Southern delegates who were making tons of money from the Ivory Coast slave trade insisted that the anti-slavery clauses be removed, or they wouldn't sign it. They wouldn't even come back into committee in the Second Continental Congress. But people don't know that history. No, they only know what their communist professors told them about this time period. Most people are afraid of righteous rebellion because they believe we couldn't fight the government and win, which isn't true. They'll say things like, you couldn't fight the government with an AR-15. Yeah, not one person. 100 million American gun owners with semi-automatic battle rifles. Like I said, you'd have to drop hydrogen bombs on America to defeat it. All the armies, not just no army, all the armies on the face of the earth combined could not defeat the firepower of the American population. And we would do it quickly. That's real battle logistics, if you understand the numbers involved, which most people don't. It's like an imbecile flat earther who doesn't understand the size of the earth. You know, they don't grasp the actual size and magnitude of the earth, because they don't have those actual physical understanding in science and mathematics and geometry and physics in hand. They don't have those tools in hand. So it's the same way when you try to present legitimate battle logistics to somebody who has never studied any military engagement styles or logistics. They're simply incorrect and it's not true. As a matter of fact, U.S. Army War College analysts have published literature on the effectiveness of small arms in urban asymmetric warfare, which is the likely form and nature of a rebellion against the tyrannical government in the modern world. These logistics are often completely ignored by armchair strategists and opponents of the Second Amendment who are too cowardly to take up arms in the first place. They believe compliance with tyrants and despots is a strategy that will somehow, quote-unquote, keep them safe long-term. But that coward strategy never actually works out, as history has demonstrated time and time again throughout the ages. Once again, they prove that they're ignorant of human history. People who comply with tyrants, they just extend their lifespan a tiny little bit, and when the tyrant's done with them, they take their head off. And see, this is what people think of. They think they're so smart by saying this. And exactly, they have their head up their ass and have no idea what the reality of it is. Hey, you with the guns, your paranoid fantasies about fighting a rebellion against a theoretical future fascist government takeover do not trump my rights to demand appropriate and reasonable public health policies to stop gun violence. Sincerely, the rest of the American people. Sincerely, the rest of the American people with their head firmly lodged up their ass. Okay? Because every statement in this meme is incorrect. It's not paranoia to believe that government becomes tyrannical. It's a historical fact. It's not a fantasy about fighting a rebellion with small arms. As a matter of fact, the next two slides are going to be historical examples where that has been done and accomplished. Okay? And no, my right to protect my freedom with firearms does trump your right to feel safe and demand that they be taken away because of quote-unquote public health policies. Yes, they do. My rights trump that. Everyone's right to self-defense trumps that. Examples of successful battle operations with small arms. See, again, ignorance of human history. How about the Vietnam War, where the Viet Cong basically defeated the United States military in protracted jungle combat? Supply lines was a big thing in this. Getting the supplies that they need appropriated by Congress was a big thing in this. And the type of small arms that they were being shot at with was a huge factor in this war. But that's what the Viet Cong used. They used AK-47s. They used 7.62x51 rifles, and they used grenade launchers and some 223 rifles, or Remington 223, NATO 5.56. Those were the small arms used in the Vietnam War by the Viet Cong, who essentially defeated and drove out the United States military from their territory. How about the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1970s through the 80s? Okay? Ever hear of Operation Cyclone? They made a movie about it. It was called Charlie Wilson's War. The biggest CIA operation in human history. Funneling taxpayer money to the Israelis to buy weapons, small arms, and then to funnel them into Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union and bleed them during the Cold War in a protracted war in the mountainous region of northern Afghanistan. How many people have ever heard of Operation Cyclone? Fantastic. I was not expecting that show of hands for that. Good. Good. So, people should really learn about it and read about it. And, they held the Soviet Union's war arsenal at bay with small arms. And the Soviets warned us not to go into Afghanistan because they said you'd be there for decades. Oh, what happened? Yeah, because we're not interested in really leaving because we want all the opium. We want to control the opium trade throughout the world. So what do we truly value, safety or freedom? Most human beings are just too cowardly to stand up to the violence and coercion of government, no matter how many of their rights are taken away. Most people have chosen comfortable slavery over potentially dangerous freedom. They've done this because their priorities and values are way out of order due to false beliefs. They fail to understand the truth that life itself has no value without freedom. Life itself has no value without freedom. That's called just surviving. Just physical survival is not thriving in life if you're not free. Who would rather just survive in a state of slavery just because you're alive rather than actually be free? I'm more concerned with being free than being alive. They've done this because their priorities and values are way out of order due to false beliefs, mainly false beliefs about death and who they are. They fail to understand the truth that life has no value without freedom. Valuing life without freedom is actually the ultimate mindset of the religion of Satanism, which if people know my work, they know I talk an absolute whole lot about what the real satanic belief system is, okay? Because I have direct experience with it from my past. And I'm telling you, in the religion of Satanism, they value physical survival. The actual first tenet of the satanic religion is survival of self above all else. Self-preservation is the absolute highest law of nature, even above freedom and morality. Freedom and morality be damned to a Satanist or to those who are trapped in the satanic mindset. See, and people think that that means worshiping the devil. It doesn't. You should watch my presentation called Satanism and the Dark Occult. It's available in the back. And you'll understand what the real mentality of Satanism is, and they have indoctrinated most people in America into this religion without even understanding that they have been indoctrinated into this religion. Okay, so of what value is physical safety if you are not actually free? Now listen to this for a moment. Listen to the logic in this philosophy. Being free does not necessarily mean that you are safe. You can be free and not be safe. But being enslaved always means that you are definitely not free. Because you are always under duress of physical violence if you are enslaved. If you do not comply with the mandates of your masters. Slavery always means that you're unsafe. There's no such thing as safety in slavery. Never has been and never will be. Yet those who value safety over freedom cannot seem to see this very blatant contradiction in their own thought process. So when I do presentations like this, I feel like Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, who came to the Pennsylvania State House here in Philadelphia, rode on a horse 300 miles over incredibly tough terrain by himself to speak in front of many rich, unconcerned representatives who thought that all the massacres that were going on in the New England colonies were just Bostoners' problems. You know? That it wasn't affecting them, so who gives a shit? And when he came here and spoke here in Philadelphia, he said to all the assembled rich delegates, if you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animating contest for freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. And may posterity forget that you were once our countrymen. That's how I feel about people who want to have the violence and duress of government continue as statists. You know? They think it's other people's problems. Because everybody thinks it's somebody else's problem until it happens to them and they get hit and they get put down real hard. Then all of a sudden, they're all up in arms over it. And maybe that's what has to happen to people in America. Maybe we're just living too comfortably and too untouched by all this violence. Maybe this violence has to happen to us directly. Or maybe even better, maybe it has to happen to our children. Maybe then people sit up and pay fucking attention. I want to address the fake-ass patriots out there, because there's tons of them too. I could do a whole presentation on these jackasses. People who think they're patriots and yet are still government supporters. Many people calling themselves militia in this country are not the true militia. Ex-military who have never renounced governmental authority comprise many of the so-called, quote, militia groups. They chose the military as a means of life advancement and took a paycheck to advance empire building on behalf of the United States and its covert monetary powers. And they could have renounced their allegiance with evil and quit their cult, but they chose to continue their consort for money and a pension, often. Now many are ignorant, racist, flag-waving, ex-military, fake-ass patriots who think that government and police represent freedom. They are the exact opposite of the true militia spoken about in the Second Amendment by the Founding Fathers because they completely lack a true understanding of rights, morality, true freedom, and above all else, natural law. They need natural law seminars brought to them so that they can understand what rights, freedom, and morality really are. Here's a great meme. When you try to patriot but end up red coating instead. Here's the Gadsden flag, the flag of the first American Revolutionary militias, okay, next to the thin blue line flag of police slavery. Yeah, that's that. I mean, can it get any more contradictory? Fear of death is the beginning of slavery. See, and this goes to real consciousness, because we don't know who we are. We don't know who we are in consciousness. See, we don't do the psychological work to really know ourselves. That's the first tenet of all the mystery school traditions of consciousness. Know thyself. Fear of physical death is the beginning of every form of slavery that has ever existed. Those who believe in physical material existence as the only reality generally exist in a continual existential state of the fear of death. Because such individuals hold the material realm as prime and ignore and discount any spiritual existence, they are almost always afraid to fight for freedom. They fear death because they don't know who they are. They deny the spirituality that is inherent in freedom, and they don't understand anarchy as the intrinsic state of a free being, meaning no rulers, no masters, no slaves. That's what anarchy is. It's not chaos. It's not lawlessness. It's not disorder. Anarchy means no rulers, no masters, no slaves. Literally means that. This is why the internal great work of consciousness is the foundational work of a sovereign being and the ultimate solution to the condition of slavery. True consciousness means knowing who you are and who the enemy is. It means knowing your surroundings and the nature of the situation in which you exist, in which you find yourself, and confronting that head on. It means understanding that you are not just a physical body, but a spiritual being having a physical experience here for the purpose of learning and growing spiritually. As long as you fear death, you can be made a slave. The threat of slavery will always be present as long as people live in a state of existential, satanic doubt when it comes to who they are in consciousness. That not knowing that they are eternal spiritual beings having a physical experience on earth. They don't have that spirituality inside them, and that's why they can be made to obey, because they fear death more than they fear slavery. Sun Tzu in The Art of War said, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but you do not know the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. But if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Freedom always trumps safety. There's a meme of people on the streets of America after the Parkland shooting holding up signs. Is freedom more important than, let me get the voice right. Is freedom more important than safety? And Big Bad Ben saying, yes, yes it is. Yes it is. Freedom is more important than safety. Protecting rights and freedom is more important than physical safety or even survival. Unfortunately, most people today love their comfortable lives much more than they love freedom. In the face of tyranny, cowards always search for safety, while good people place themselves between tyranny and their principles, even when death is probable or certain. Cowards choose either to embrace evil and enlist themselves to tyranny as its agents against humanity, or they seek to appease tyrants, insisting that the enemy is too strong and cannot be beaten. This is what I hear over and over again by weakling cowards. You can't ever fight them, they're too strong. No, we got to fight them in mind, we got to fight them in spirit, and we have to fight them in body. You can never take physical confrontation off the table. They're doing violence to us every friggin' day. So the physical option can never be taken off the table. We have to work to change the minds and hearts of people so that they stop believing that slavery is morally legitimate and that they continue not to understand that government is slavery. It's just a covert form of it. And you've just diffused the masters into a body calling themselves government. It's an oligarchical slave plantation. That's all it is. That's all government is. Instead of having one master, there's just several masters. People who think that they're above everybody else when it comes to rights. Cowards choose... Okay, so where was I here? Cowards will not fight for freedom because they discard their principles at the first sign of danger. Modern-day cowards see militarized police and armed forces as some kind of invincible, unbeatable leviathan. The coward will always choose to remain passive, and as a result, they become complicit in evil themselves. Remaining passive in the face of evil is becoming complicit with the evil. Let me say that again. Remaining passive in the face of evil is to become complicit with that evil. Good people will always develop the will to fight for their rights and freedom, whatever the odds may be. Because this is what happens when we choose security over freedom. It eventually eats us. We think we can put it on a leash and we can control it, but then eventually it grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually it eats you. That's why Ben Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberty to secure a little temporary safety will have neither and will lose both. Courage is sorely absent and desperately needed. I'm getting ready to wrap it up. This is my last section. Only a completely immoral coward would say, let slavery continue to reign, just because death might be the alternative. There are things in this world, in this universe, that are worse than death, and slavery is one of them. The response of the cowards is always that we couldn't possibly fight the forces of tyranny because we would lose. A righteous rebellion for freedom is not waged only because there would be a significant chance of winning. That's not why righteous rebellion is waged. You think people who have waged righteous rebellion always knew they were going to win? You think they sat down and calculated, oh, we're definitely going to win this thing, so let's start fighting. It's not how it works. They put their lives on the line. They didn't know what the outcome was going to be. The proper motivation is that slavery, to fight a righteous rebellion, is knowing that slavery is morally wrong and should not be allowed to continue, whatever the cost may be. Real rebels don't care whether they might die in physical combat. And I'm not talking about soldiers here. They are following the dictates of their masters and not thinking. They're just obeying. I'm talking about real rebels. They don't care whether they might die in combat. That's what a real warrior is. A real warrior is not an order-following soldier. They're not fighting who they're fighting because they were told to fight them. They're fighting who they're fighting because they recognize the immorality of the opposing side and know that they must be beaten at whatever the cost may be. They don't fight because they desire only to physically survive. They fight because they would rather fight and die than to accept slavery as the alternative. That is what liberty or death actually means. It means that the instinct for the preservation of freedom overcomes the instinct for the preservation of life. Only someone in a purely satanic mindset chooses for life to be preserved, even if freedom is not preserved. This is a quote by Harriet Tubman, who helped many slaves escape to the northern states during the times of oppression of black slavery in early America. She said there was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would take the other, for no man should take me alive. I should fight for liberty as long as my strength lasted. That's a rebel. That's a real woman. Self-defense is our duty and our personal responsibility. An anonymous quote. If anyone knows the author of the quote, please let me know. No one needs a gun until they do. It's about preparedness. Building a storm cellar or keeping a first aid kit does not make you weak or a coward. It makes you smart and responsible. Saying you don't need a gun is like saying that you don't believe evil exists. It's a naive, careless, stupid, and downright dangerous perspective. Self-defense is your responsibility. It cannot be delegated to anyone. Grow up and own yourself. Thank you. I'm gonna wrap up with two more quick things, two more slides. This is the true meaning and purpose of the Second Amendment decoded by me. This is how I would write it in modern language. Since it is true that a well-armed, fully functional, and effective distributed fighting force comprised of the whole populace is absolutely necessary and required for the preservation of a free way of life, the inherent and unalienable right of all individuals to possess and carry arms and ammunition of any kind shall never be removed or incrementally encroached upon by anyone. That is the Second Amendment's true, original intent and purpose decoded, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Just some final words regarding courage. This is about doing internal work upon the self to overcome a mindset where we place physical survival above the importance of maintaining freedom in our lives. Now, everybody asks me the question, how can that be instilled in another person? And the answer is, I don't really know. I can't give courage to someone else. I can only speak the truth and attempt to live the truth to the best of my ability. And in so doing, set an example for other people and say what I mean and then do it and act upon it rightly. But to really work upon ourselves and develop courage that needs to be developed is a truly inside job that has to be done one-on-one by taking a very much needed deeper look at ourselves and who we truly are. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much today for your time and your attention. Government is slavery.